The smell of new tires always makes me want to scream, because that's where they hid the 2 kilos of cocaine. I was 3 minutes away from picking up Leo and Mia from school when the flashing lights mirrored in my rear view. It was too fast. The CPS agent was already there with the paperwork signed, and my mother-in-law was waiting at the curb to take my children. She didn't even look at me. She just adjusted her pearls and drove away. Now, I have exactly 48 hours until the custody hearing. 48 hours before a judge decides I never get to hold my daughter again. But here's the thing. My neighbor has been watching me through a scope for months, and my own lawyer is the one who paid for the drugs. They think they've buried me. They think I'm just a suburban mom who will break. They're wrong, because they forgot about the camera on my son's bicycle. Let me take you back to the morning this nightmare began. The sun over the California coast was a blinding, beautiful lie. It hung low in the sky, a heavy orange coin melting into the Pacific, casting long, predatory shadows across the asphalt of the elementary school parking lot. Sarah Miller squinted against the glare, her hand shielding her eyes as she searched for Leo's messy hair and Mia's tattered rabbit among the swarm of children pouring out of the double doors. The air smelled of salt spray and the sweet, cloying scent of blooming jasmine from the school's manicured hedges. She reached for her minivan door, her fingers brushing the warm metal, when the first siren wailed. It wasn't the distant, fading cry of an ambulance on the highway. This was sharp, immediate, and bone-rattling. 2 police cruisers swerved into the loading zone, their tires screaming against the pavement, kicking up a cloud of grit that stung Sarah's skin. "Sarah Miller, step away from the vehicle." The command was a physical blow. Officer Miller, no relation, though the shared name felt like a cruel joke, slammed his door shut. The metallic thud vibrated in Sarah's chest. Before she could process the movement, her wrists were yanked behind her. The cold, jagged teeth of the metal cuffs ratcheted tight, biting into her skin with a series of rhythmic clicks. "What is this? I'm just picking up my kids." Sarah's voice cracked, the sound thin and brittle against the roar of the idling engines. "We received a tip, ma'am, about a significant quantity of controlled substances," the officer muttered, his face a mask of professional indifference. He reached into the back of her minivan, past the spilled juice boxes and the stray Lego bricks, and pulled a panel from the spare tire well. He held up a heavy plastic baggie. Inside, white powder sparkled under the midday sun like crushed diamonds. Sarah's stomach did a slow, sickening roll. The world tilted. "That's not mine. I've never seen that in my life." "Save it for the judge," he said, pressing a heavy hand onto her shoulder to force her toward the cruiser. The school doors opened again, and this time she saw them. Leo was counting the stairs as he descended. 1, 2, 3. His eyes fixed on his sneakers. Mia followed, clutching her rabbit's ear so hard her knuckles were white. They stopped dead at the sight of their mother pinned against the police car. A sleek black sedan glided to the curb like a shark in shallow water, cutting off the school bus exit. Deborah Vance stepped out first. The sharp, medicinal scent of her hand sanitizer preceded her, a cloud of rubbing alcohol that cut through the jasmine. She adjusted her thick-rimmed glasses and sighed. A heavy, performative sound of a woman burdened by the world's failures. Following her was Evelyn Sterling. She looked like an ice sculpture in a $1,000 suit, her silver bob perfectly undisturbed by the coastal breeze. She reached up and unbuttoned her blazer, then rebuttoned it. 1, 2, 3, 4. The ritual was complete. "Sarah," Deborah called out, her voice smooth as polished marble. We have the emergency custody orders, signed 10 minutes ago. Given the circumstances, the children are being placed in the care of their grandmother immediately. No! Sarah lunged forward, but the officer's grip was a vice, his thumb digging into the muscle of her arm. Leo, Mia, don't look. Evelyn didn't look at Sarah. She didn't acknowledge the woman screaming her name. She simply walked toward the children, her heels clicking a rhythmic, predatory beat against the pavement. She reached for the minivan's sliding door where the kids had frozen. Wait, Sarah gasped, her throat raw and tasting of copper. Mia's scared of strangers. She needs her routine. Please, Evelyn, don't do this. Evelyn stopped, her manicured fingers wrapping around the handle. She turned her head just enough for the sunlight to glint off her lucky pearl necklace. The law doesn't care about her routines anymore, Sarah. It cares about the narcotics in your cup holder. We are going to provide them with a stable, clean environment. Something you clearly cannot manage. The sliding door hissed open, a sound like a dying breath. Inside, the children huddled together, their small faces pressed against the tinted glass, watching their mother crumble onto the gravel. As the cruiser door slammed shut on Sarah, the last thing she heard was the low, vibrating hum coming from Mia's throat. A funeral dirge for a life that had ended in the span of 60 seconds. The police station was a cathedral of gray linoleum and the smell of industrial bleach. It was a place designed to make a person feel small, replaceable, and processed. Sarah sat on a plastic chair that hummed with the vibration of a nearby HVAC vent, her mind spinning in tight, frantic circles. Every time a door slammed, she flinched, her shoulders jumping toward her ears. During the hours of processing, between the ink-stained fingers and the blinding flash of the mugshot camera, a single thought began to take root in the chaos of her mind. She wasn't a drug dealer, a drug. She was a mother who spent her days designing high-end digital interfaces and her evenings scrubbing crayon off the walls. The only time her car had been out of her sight in the last month was 2 days ago. The Sterling-owned garage. She remembered the way James Peterson, the head mechanic, had looked at her when she dropped the minivan off for a routine oil change. He'd been quoting his father, something about oil being cheaper than an engine. But his eyes had darted toward the office where Evelyn's driver had been waiting. It had felt off then, a prickle of unease she dismissed as suburban paranoia. Now, it felt like a smoking gun. By the time her bail was posted by an anonymous source, a final, mocking mercy from the Sterling estate, no doubt. The sun had long since vanished. The police parking lot was a vast expanse of cracked asphalt under a single, flickering orange streetlight. Sarah walked toward her impounded car, which had been released with a search-completed sticker slapped across the driver's side window. The silence of the lot was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of a nearby sprinkler system. Click, click, click. She reached for her keys, her hand shaking so violently the metal jingled like a bell. Suddenly, a shadow detached itself from a concrete pillar. A man, his face obscured by a dark hood, lunged from the darkness. He didn't go for her throat. He went for her shoulder, his fingers clawing at the strap of her leather bag. "Give it here," he hissed. His breath smelled of stale cigarettes and adrenaline. Sarah didn't think. She didn't scream. The months of being gaslit by her husband, the years of feeling the Sterling family's shadow over her life, crystallized into a single, sharp point of rage. She swung her heavy keychain, a brass carabiner loaded with keys and a solid metal decorative fob with everything she had. The metal bit into the man's cheek with a wet thud. He cried out, stumbling back into the pool of orange light. Sarah didn't wait to see if he'd get up. She scrambled into her car, slammed the lock, and threw the vehicle into reverse. Her tires shrieked against the asphalt, leaving black ribbons behind as she tore out of the lot. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. They weren't just trying to take her kids, they were trying to take her life. She pulled over 2 miles away, her breath coming in ragged gulps. She needed proof. She needed something real. She reached into the glove box, her fingers brushing against a crumpled piece of paper that the police had missed. It was the service receipt from the Sterling garage. Her eyes scanned the blurred ink. There, at the bottom, was a handwritten note in the margin, special detailing per ES instructions. E.S. Evelyn Sterling. Sarah pulled a laminated index card from her pocket, her truth list. She gripped a pen and added a new line at the bottom, her handwriting jagged and raw. The receipt is real. The attack was real. I am not crazy. The next morning, the air in the city felt heavy, like a storm was brewing just beyond the horizon. Sarah drove to the glass and steel monolith that housed the offices of Henderson and Associates. Mark Henderson had been her lawyer for 3 years, a man who smiled with his teeth but never his eyes, a man who always seemed to be mirroring her posture to make her feel at ease. As she sat in his plush leather chair, the AC was cranked so low it made her skin prickle. Mark sat across from her, clicking his expensive fountain pen in patterns of 3. Click, click, click. "Sarah, I've looked over the charges," Mark said, his voice a soothing, practiced baritone. "It's bad. The quantity they found. The DA is looking to make an example of you. If we don't play this exactly right, you're looking at 10 years. Minimum." Sarah leaned forward, placing the crumpled garage receipt on his mahogany desk. "I found this, Mark. Evelyn had my car detailed the day before the arrest. She planted it. I have the proof right here." Mark didn't pick up the paper. He didn't even look at it. He just kept clicking that pen. Click, click, click. "Sarah, listen to me. This kind of accusation, it makes you look unstable. It plays right into their hands. Evelyn Sterling is a pillar of the community. You're a woman who just had a nervous breakdown in a school parking lot." "I didn't have a breakdown. I was being kidnapped from my children." Mark sighed, a sound of weary disappointment. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder. As he opened it, Sarah's eyes caught a glimpse of a document tucked in the back. It was a wire transfer confirmation. The sender was Sterling Holdings. The recipient was a shell company Sarah recognized from Mark's own business filings. The realization hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. The room seemed to shrink, the cold air suddenly cloying and thin. Subverted Phase 1. Smart decision. Sarah felt a surge of cold, calculated clarity. She didn't scream. She didn't accuse him. If Mark was on the payroll, he was her only window into their strategy. She decided to play the part of the broken, defeated woman. She would pretend to trust him, lean into his advice, and use him to feed the Sterlings the information she wanted them to have. It was a chess move, sacrificing her pride to gain a tactical advantage. She would let him think he had her contained while she built her own case in the shadows. Phase 2. False positive. Mark's posture relaxed. He stopped clicking the pen and leaned in, his smile widening into something almost fatherly. "That's my girl," he whispered. "I knew you'd see reason. Look, I've drafted a temporary agreement. You move into a smaller apartment, you attend these wellness seminars, and I can get Evelyn to grant you supervised visits by next month. We show the court you're taking responsibility and the drug charges. Well, I have friends in the DA's office. We can make the evidence have some chain of custody issues." Sarah nodded, wiping a fake tear from her eye. Thank you, Mark. I don't know what I'd do without you. You're the only one I can trust. She felt a flicker of triumph. He was biting. He was going to lead her right to the heart of the conspiracy. Phase 3. The crack. She stood up to leave, her hand reaching for her purse. But as she moved, her sleeve caught on the edge of the desk, pulling back to reveal the dark, purple bruising from the handcuffs. Mark's eyes didn't go to the bruise. They went to her pocket, the one where she kept her truth list. His expression shifted. It wasn't the look of a protector anymore. It was the look of a man who had just spotted a cockroach on his dinner plate. "What's that, Sarah?" he asked, his voice dropping an octave. "The little card you're always whispering to?" Phase 4. Catastrophic reveal. Before she could react, Mark reached out and snatched the card from her pocket. He read it slowly, a cruel smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. "The sky's blue. My name is Sarah. The receipt is real." He laughed, a dry hacking sound. "You really are far gone, aren't you?" He didn't give the card back. Instead, he picked up his desk phone and hit a speed dial button. "Deborah?" "Yeah, she's here. She's experiencing another episode of acute paranoia. She's claiming the garage receipt is a confession, and she's talking to a piece of paper. I think we need to move the emergency hearing to tomorrow morning. She's a danger to herself." Sarah lunged for the card, but Mark caught her wrists, the same place the cuffs had bitten in the day before. The physical pain was nothing compared to the realization of her mistake. By trying to play him, she had given him the final piece of evidence he needed to prove she was mentally incompetent. "You think you're smart, Sarah," Mark hissed, leaning close enough that she could smell the expensive bourbon on his breath. "But you're just a file. And Evelyn Sterling owns the cabinet. I've already sent the digital copies of your truth list to the court-appointed psychologist. You didn't just lose your kids today, you lost your voice." He shoved her back into the chair and dropped the laminated card into his shredder. Sarah watched as the words, "My name is Sarah," were turned into thin, meaningless ribbons of plastic. She was in a worse position than when she walked in. She wasn't just a drug dealer now. She was a lunatic. The drive home was a blur of gray pavement and the rhythmic thumping of her own heart. Sarah pulled into her driveway, her eyes scanning the neat suburban street. Everything looked perfect. The lawn sprinklers were ticking in their mechanical unison, ch-ch-ch-ch, and the palm trees stood like sentinels against the fading light. But as she walked to her front door, she saw it. The wood was splintered around the lock. The door was slightly ajar, swaying in the breeze with a mournful creak. She pushed it open, her breath catching in her throat. The house smelled like her life. Vanilla candles and the faint scent of Leo's gym shoes. But something was wrong. The air was too still. She walked into the kitchen, her footsteps echoing on the tile. There, sitting perfectly in the center of the kitchen table, was Mia's favorite teddy bear. The one with the missing button eye and the torn ear. The bear that was supposed to be at the Sterling estate with her daughter. It sat upright, staring at her with its single plastic eye. Sarah backed away, her hands flying to her mouth. It was a message. A silent, physical warning from Evelyn. "We can get in. We can take what we want. You are never safe." She ran to the window, pulling the curtain back just a fraction. Across the street, her neighbor, Robert Kelly, was standing in his driveway. He was a man she'd known for 2 years, a quiet, nondescript guy who helped her carry groceries once. But today, he wasn't gardening. He was leaning against his car, talking to a man in a dark suit. The man in the suit was Evelyn's chauffeur. Robert didn't look like a neighbor anymore. He stood with a rigid tactical awareness, his eyes scanning the street. He looked like a man standing guard. Sarah let the curtain fall. She was being watched from the inside and the out. She felt the walls of her own home leaning in, turning the hallways into tight, inescapable chutes. She needed to move. She needed to find the one piece of evidence they couldn't shred or steal. The bicycle. Leo's bike had a dash cam, a small, rugged camera she'd bought him for his birthday because he loved filming his stunts. The bike had been in the back of the minivan during the garage visit. If the camera had been running, it would have been pointed directly at the spare tire well. She remembered seeing the bike in the trunk when the police arrested her, which meant the bike was now at the Sterling estate, tucked away in their massive multi-car garage. She grabbed a heavy jacket and a pair of wire cutters from the junk drawer. She didn't have her truth list anymore, but she had the memory of her children's faces. That would have to be enough. The Sterling estate was a fortress of stone and iron, perched on a cliffside overlooking the churning Pacific. As Sarah approached the perimeter fence, a violent thunderstorm began to roll in from the ocean. The sky turned the color of a fresh bruise, and the first heavy drops of rain began to hiss against the pavement. The wind howled through the iron bars, a sound like 1,000 screaming voices. Sarah gripped the wire cutters, her knuckles raw from the cold. She found a blind spot in the hedge, a place where the dying crown of a palm tree blocked the sweep of a security camera, and began to snip. The metal bit into her palms, but she didn't feel the pain. She only felt the rhythmic thumping of the estate's industrial pool pump, a low-grade vibration that seemed to match the pounding of her blood. She squeezed through the gap, her clothes snagging on the thorns. The estate grounds were a nightmare of shadows and slick, manicured grass. She stayed low, moving between the marble statues that looked like ghosts in the flashes of lightning. The garage was a separate building, a sleek structure of glass and steel. Through the rain-streaked windows, she could see the shapes of luxury cars, the Ferraris and Bentleys that Evelyn collected like trophies. And there, in the corner, next to a stack of water-damaged files, was Leo's bicycle. Sarah reached the side door, her fingers fumbling with the electronic lock. She didn't have a key, but she had a designer's eye for patterns. She watched the keypad, looking for the wear on the buttons. 2, 4, 7, 8. The numbers were slightly duller than the others. She tried the combination. Beep. The light stayed red. She tried again, reversing the order. Beep. On the third try, the lock clicked. The sound was lost in a crack of thunder that shook the very ground beneath her feet. She slipped inside. The air smelled of oxidized copper and old gasoline, a thick, cloying scent that burned the back of her throat. She ran to the bike, her hands searching the handlebars for the small plastic housing of the camera. Her fingers found it. She popped the latch, and the small SD card slid into her palm. "I have it," she whispered, her voice a ragged sob. "I have you." But as she turned to leave, a heavy, limping gait echoed from the shadows of the garage. James Peterson stepped out from behind a silver sedan. He wasn't wearing his mechanic's jumpsuit. He was wearing a heavy raincoat, and in his hand, he gripped a rusted iron wrench. "You shouldn't have come here, Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice trembling. "My daddy always said, some doors are better left locked." "James, please," Sarah begged, backing away until her spine hit the cold glass of a display case. "You know what they did. You saw them planted. Just let me go." "I can't," he whispered. "They paid for my mother's surgery. They own the air I breathe." He lunged. Sarah dodged, the wrench whistling past her ear and shattering the glass behind her. Shards of crystal rained down like frozen sparks. She grabbed a heavy garden tool, a long-handled spade, from a nearby rack and swung it blindly. The flat of the blade caught James in the chest, knocking the wind out of him. He slumped against the hood of a Bentley, gasping for air. Sarah didn't wait. She burst through the door and into the screaming wind of the storm. Subverted Phase 1. Smart decision. Sarah sprinted toward the perimeter fence, the SD card clutched in her fist like a holy relic. She knew she couldn't just go to the police, not with Mark Henderson monitoring the local precinct. She decided to head straight to the offices of the California Chronicle. She knew a reporter there, a woman who specialized in corporate corruption. If she could get the footage onto the morning news, the Sterlings wouldn't be able to bury it. It was the only move that made sense. Bypass the corrupt legal system and go straight to the court of public opinion. She felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. This was the win. Phase 2. False positive. She reached her car, which she'd hidden a half-mile down the road. She jammed the SD card into her laptop, her breath hitching as the file directory popped up. There it was. Asterisk file 0042.mp4 asterisk. Timestamped 2 days ago. 1:14 p.m. She clicked play. The image was shaky but clear. She saw the garage interior. She saw James Peterson standing by, looking nervous. And then, she saw Evelyn Sterling's chauffeur walk to the spare tire well of her minivan and drop the plastic baggie inside. "I got you," Sarah screamed, and the sound lost in the thunder. She began the upload to the reporter's secure server. The progress bar crawled forward. 10%, 40%, 80%. Upload complete. She leaned back against the headrest, her eyes closing in a moment of pure, unadulterated relief. The nightmare was over. The truth was out. Phase 3. The crack. She opened her phone to call the reporter, but a notification popped up on her screen. It was an automated alert from her home security system. Motion detected in living room. She tapped the feed. The image was grainy, but she saw a man in a dark suit standing in her kitchen. He wasn't searching for anything. He was sitting at her computer. Her heart skipped a beat. Why would they be at her house if she had the evidence here? Then, she looked at the SD card again. There was a small blue light flickering on the side of the camera housing she'd taken it from. A light she hadn't noticed in the dark of the garage. Phase 4. Catastrophic reveal. The car door was ripped open. Evelyn Sterling stood there, shielded by a large black umbrella held by a security guard. She wasn't angry. She looked almost bored. "Did you enjoy the movie, Sarah?" Evelyn asked, her voice cutting through the rain like a blade. "It's already uploaded," Sarah spat, holding up the laptop. "The Chronicle has it. You're done." Evelyn smiled. A thin, predatory line. "The Chronicle? You mean the paper my family's foundation has funded for 30 years? The one whose editor-in-chief is currently at dinner with my son?" She reached out and took the laptop from Sarah's numb fingers. "And as for the upload, you really should read the fine print on your children's toys. That camera has a built-in Wi-Fi sync. It's been uploading to our private server since the moment you entered the gates, which means we've had plenty of time to edit the metadata." Evelyn turned the screen toward Sarah. The video was playing, but it wasn't the chauffeur planting drugs. It was Sarah. Through the magic of digital manipulation, the deepfake technology Evelyn's tech firm specialized in, the video now showed Sarah Miller carefully hidden the cocaine herself, then looking at the camera and winking. "And while you were playing commando in my garden," Evelyn continued, "Mark Henderson was busy at your house. He's just finished uploading a very detailed, very tragic suicide note to your hard drive. It explains how the guilt of your drug empire became too much. How you couldn't face your children. The security guards moved in, their hands heavy on Sarah's shoulders. You didn't find the proof, Sarah, Evelyn whispered, leaning in close. The scent of her pearls, cold, metallic, and ancient, filled Sarah's senses. You just provided the final evidence of your own guilt. You're not the victim anymore. You're the villain of your own story. The basement of the Sterling estate was a windowless cell of cold concrete and the hum of the pool pump. Sarah lay on the floor, her clothes soaked and clinging to her skin. The air was stagnant, smelling of damp earth and the faint, sweet scent of the sedative they'd forced down her throat. Upstairs, she could hear the muffled sounds of a normal, wealthy life. The clink of silver on china, the distant laughter of her children, a sound that felt like a knife in her gut. Evelyn entered the room an hour later. She was carrying a small silver tray. On it sat a glass of water and a single, pre-filled syringe. "It's a clean exit, Sarah," Evelyn said, her voice echoing in the small space. "A massive overdose. The police will find you in your own bed. It's the kindest ending I can offer a woman of your station." Sarah looked up, her eyes bleary but focused. "Why? Why go to all this trouble for a common girl like me?" Evelyn sat on a wooden stool, straightening her skirt. "Because you are a smudge on the geometry of this family. My son is weak. He chose you because he wanted to be normal. But the Sterling bloodline isn't meant for normal. It's meant for power. And I won't let you dilute that with your suburban mediocrity and your truth lists." She picked up the syringe, the needle glinting under the single bare bulb. "I'm going to raise Leo and Mia. I'm going to strip away everything you gave them. I'm going to teach them that mercy is a luxury they cannot afford. By the time they're 20, they won't even remember your name." Sarah felt a cold, hard knot of resolve tighten in her chest. She had spent her life designing systems. She knew how data moved. She knew how people looked at screens, but never at the code behind them. "You're right, Evelyn," Sarah whispered. "I am common. I'm a designer. I spend all day thinking about how users interact with their world." She reached into her bra and pulled out her phone. It was cracked, the screen a spider web of glass, but the red light at the top was pulsing. "And do you know what the most important rule of design is? Always have a backup." Evelyn froze. "What is that?" "It's a high-fidelity voice memo," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. "I activated it the moment I saw you in the parking lot. And because your estate has such sophisticated Wi-Fi, it's been live streaming this entire conversation to a secure cloud server, the same one I use for my client presentations." She smiled, a real, jagged smile. "And I didn't send it to the Chronicle. I sent the link to Judge Harrison's private email, the one he uses for his sugar packet collection forum. He's very protective of his order, Evelyn, and I think he's going to find your architectural directives very untidy." From upstairs, the sound of a heavy door being kicked in echoed through the floorboards. Then came the sirens. Not the predatory ones from the school, but the deep, rolling roar of a dozen cruisers. Evelyn stood, the syringe falling from her hand and shattering on the concrete. For the first time in 40 years, the ritual failed. She reached for her blazer, her fingers fumbling with the buttons. 1, 2, the door to the basement burst open. Officer Miller, the same one who had arrested Sarah, stood there, his weapon drawn. But he wasn't looking at Sarah. He was looking at the woman with the silver bob, and the shattered syringe. "Evelyn Sterling," he said, his voice grim. "You have the right to remain silent." The courtroom 3 weeks later was a different place. The fluorescent lights were still surgical white, but they didn't feel like a microscope anymore. They felt like the sun after a long, cold night. Sarah sat at the defense table, her hands steady. She didn't need a truth list anymore. The truth was playing through the courtroom speakers. Evelyn's own voice, cold and arrogant, admitting to the frame-up, the drugs, and the planned murder. Judge Harrison sat on the bench, his heavy jowls set in a mask of granite. He wasn't sorting sugar packets. He was looking at the evidence, the real evidence, that the whistleblower mechanic, James Peterson, had finally provided. He'd found the original, unedited footage in a backup drive he'd hidden from the Sterlings. "In all my years on the bench," Harrison growled, his voice like gravel in a blender, "I have never seen such a calculated, malicious abuse of the legal system. Mrs. Miller, the charges against you are dismissed with prejudice. And as for you, Mrs. Sterling..." Sarah didn't stay to hear the sentencing. She didn't need to see the handcuffs on Evelyn's wrists or the way Mark Henderson tried to hide his face from the cameras as he was led away in his own set of metal rings. She walked out of the courthouse and into the warm, golden light of the California afternoon. Leo and Mia were waiting by the fountain. Leo was counting the tiles. 8, 9, 10. And Mia was holding her rabbit. But she wasn't humming the funeral dirge. She was laughing as she watched a seagull dive for a piece of bread. Thomas stood a few feet away, looking older, more broken. He had small bandages on his cuticles, but he was looking at Sarah with a plea for forgiveness in his eyes. Sarah walked past him. She didn't feel hate. She didn't feel anything for the Sterling name anymore. It was just a word, a hollow structure that had finally collapsed under its own weight. "Come on, kids," she said, her voice clear and resonant. "Let's go home." 6 months later, the Pacific Ocean looked different. It wasn't a beautiful lie anymore. It was just water, vast and blue and honest. Sarah sat on a blanket on a beach in Santa Barbara, the sand warm beneath her legs. She watched Leo and Mia running through the surf, their screams of joy rising above the roar of the waves. She had moved them away from the polished streets and the dying palm trees. Here, the air smelled of salt and freedom. She had a new job, a small house with a door she didn't have to bolt from the inside, and a life that didn't require a laminated card to verify. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, smooth stone she'd found on the shore. It was solid, physical, and real. She thought about the Sterling sometimes, about the way they had tried to define her by their own cold geometry. She realized now that they hadn't targeted her because she was weak. They had targeted her because she was the only thing they couldn't control. A person who knew the value of a messy, beautiful, common truth. Sarah Miller closed her eyes and let the sun warm her face. For the first time in her life, she didn't need to record the moment. She didn't need to prove she was there. The sky was blue. Her name was Sarah. And she was finally, truly home.